Another rumination at the end of day. Things I've been thinking about, and I'm kind of people that watch me and pay attention, a few people that pay attention to the way I think about stuff. This is a rumination at the end of day. And what I'm thinking about, considering what I've said, is that I feel that we are in perilous times. And what is it that has culminated this experiment called civilization? What has brought us to the brink in the sense of we have invented a magnificent technology considered to be so superior and complex? A nuclear scientist, you need to be a nuclear scientist to understand the complexity of the atom, this construct that has electrons and neutrons and whatever it is that makes up this construct, that has been able to be split in what is called nuclear fission. And we are now at a point in our existence where a technology has literally threatened all life on Earth. So my rumination at end of day, the work that I make, that you see behind me, that I show you sometimes, and what it is that motivates me to do the things that I do, I've been thinking about the concept of nothing. What is it that is nothing? What is the substance of nothing? This is of course an oxymoron. It makes no sense. The fact that there is a word that stands for something that is not something, nothing, these are opposites. It doesn't work, right? We're kind of caught. I feel myself caught in this conundrum, which has manifested itself in existence as annihilation. The idea that we will no longer be able to sustain ourselves because we figured out a technology that could eliminate everything, all life on Earth. This is not a dispute. This is not somebody that can argue against, unless we're complete, total wingnuts that don't understand what it is that we're engaged in when we have suffering, we have pain, we have illness, we have hundreds and thousands or huge numbers of illnesses that we are afflicted with, that kill us, we die from. So there is an end in the sense of death. Now, what I'm interested in today, what I'm thinking about, is the concept of nothing. And if you read Robert Thurman, Uma Thurman's daddy, who was a Buddhist, he brought Buddhism back from the East and introduced us to the idea of Western Buddhism. No, I think Thomas Merton was before him, but you have this idea that comes from some other part of the planet that we're not really that comfortable or used to, that introduce the concept. I don't know if Buddhism introduces the concept. Somewhere along the line, the concept was, the construct of nothing was introduced into our consciousness. Now I'm going to say, my ruminations at the end of the day, we are actually caught in that interval, what we consider to be impossible to conceive of, as Robert Thurman has indicated. He was in a discussion with Carl Sagan, who was a professed atheist, who said that when you die, there is nothing. And Robert Thurman simply said, if all that you can conceive of is something, how can you postulate what is nothing? We cannot conceive of nothing. However, this is very curious to me within the dilemma that I find myself thinking about this. What is the dilemma that we're in? Now I'm going to draw a few things together here for whoever sort of enjoys this kind of, what is it, a reflection, a rumination. What is it that motivates me to make any kind of work? The stuff that you see behind me, the symmetries, as I call them, the broken symmetries. And what has really intrigued me is the idea of the interval. What is it that is in the interval? If you think of the binary system of communication, the idea of the fundamental basis of computer technology is based on yeses and nos, the ones and the zeros. And what is it that exists between the 1 and the 0? This is, I find, even more intriguing than the thought that computers are so complex and fast, and the computing abilities creating enormous benefit to humankind and all existence on this planet, all life on this planet. And I'm thinking to myself, well, what is it that has disturbed me on this concept of nothing, which is impossible to conceive, but which appears to exist even in the sense of an interval? What is it that is between the 1 and the 0? What is that? Is there an actual, what we consider to be a time frame? What is that idea of time? You look at the clock and it goes from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock. There is an interval of what we could call an hour. So what is that interval? That sense of nothing, which is perplexing, which is probably quite devastating to our psyche, to our understanding. How do we fill this aspect of voidness? Carl Sagan just said there is nothing. And Robert Thurman corrected him and said, you cannot conceive of nothing if all that there is something. In other words, you cannot think of nothing because all we can think of is something. You see what I'm saying? I'm relating this to the situation that we're in. It's not abstract from the point of view that it has nothing to do with reality. You go shopping, you get your tomatoes, you get your mayonnaise, you make a sandwich. It's like, it has nothing to do with that, still functions. I'm saying that there is a more fundamental level of our being that is now in a real contradiction, in a state that we can no longer sustain, which is why we've come to the place where we've come. That's what I believe, that's what I think, that's what I'm thinking about. And I'm trying in the best way I can, within my capacities of a thoughtful person, to represent something of this conundrum we feel we are in. And I'm going to come back to my standard response. Ultimately, you know what that is, but I'm going to lead up to it, why I think this is so important. In order for us to be able to overcome this conundrum of the idea of introducing a word that makes no sense as nothing. Nothing makes no sense. It's like you cannot prove a negative. Nothing is a non-concept. It's like it's irrelevant. It doesn't contribute to our well-being in any sense. I would much rather not have not is another word that is related to nothing because it's in the word nothing not. Should it be in our vocabulary? Should it be introduced to our psyche? I'm coming to what it is that disturbed me and motivated me to reflect. The way when I listen to somebody like Alan Watts talking about Eastern philosophy and his understanding of what it is that makes us really us. And you can dance on a pin on all of this, right? You can get all the books in the world, the self-help books, the philosophies, the ideas that have been floated around, but it all gets stuck on this point. This is what I'm reflecting on. It gets stuck on the idea of the interval between something that we have no idea what happens. So in a computer, for example, you have ones and zeros, trillions, being cataloged, cached, that represent, that symbolize, that represent something in the real world. It is a symbol for the real world, but we're stuck in the interval. This is what I thought. This is what I came to as I'm working on my broken symmetries, that the symmetry is dysfunctional because we're stuck in an interval. This was my thought. So what is it that creates significance and meaning in our day-to-day lives in a fundamental? I mean, when I say this, I'm not discarding the sort of autonomic functions. Like when you're sleeping, you're still breathing. You're not thinking about breathing. You're breathing because the body does what it does. It is innate. This is a mystery. This is how things work. But I'm saying outside of understanding something that is considered this mystery, I'm thinking about stuff that creates dysfunction. I'm very interested in why it is we as a species, as thoughtful, caring, kind people end up being as dysfunctional as we are, that we could just ignore an event like Fukushima. We're caught in the interval. See, Fukushima for me is being caught in the interval. The reason it is allowed to continue is because we have been primed to accept nothing. And nothing is a fabrication. It's like Carl Sagan. He was pushing this concept of atheism and nothing, which is impossible to actually conceive. So we're in an impossible situation, which is why, or the impossible situation is that we're caught in an interval. This is what I'm thinking. And how do we get out of this interval? How do we get ourselves out of this state of inactivity around something that is so monumental? And we ended up there, as I say, because we have been seduced to consider the possibility a word, just a word, the word nothing or not, is actually significant and meaningful to you or me. Not has no actual meaning, neither does nothing. I'm kind of confusing the language as well because I'm using the words I'm denying and explaining them. It's like, how do you define a word by itself? You can't. You have to somehow come up with it. Anyway. So here's my point. Here's my point on the substance of nothing, which has to be something, which is impossible. And this interval, what we are facing within ourselves, is continuously being stuck in something that is unresolved, that cannot be resolved as long as we rely on any kind of tradition, what I call culture or civilization. I call it the culture of death, that will never ever provide us with an alternative to what it has produced, what it has accomplished over so-called 6,000 years, however that works out. It's all a bunch of hooey anyway. If you look into the major events in history, you cannot verify anything that has been proposed because it's all proposed on the premise of keeping us in this interval. This is what I'm saying. So how do we get out of this? How do I get out of this interval of being confused, of being in a kind of, I don't know, what is that state? There's a kind of feeling, we're conditioned to accept a kind of oblivion. This is what it feels like to me. And you know, in terms of what is this oblivion, it seems to be punctuated by death, I suppose. There is an anxiety around death. I mean, I feel a level of anxiety around death. So I understand that this function within us, what I'm talking about, is propagated, this dysfunction, the dysfunction is propagated by a culture that believes itself to benefit, or people that are at the one end, all the usual suspects. You call them out whichever way you want. I'm not going to do it. But there are many individuals that think of themselves as benefiting from keeping us in an interval that is totally antithetical to our nature. The idea of nothing is impossible. And you know, like I say, the atheist idea makes no sense whatsoever if all you can think of is something. And I'm not invoking religion or even the omnipotent being and all. I'm not interested in all the liaisons that have the inside scoop. They've never ever died and come back and all this kind of stuff. They can say whatever the hell they want, but it doesn't make any difference to me. What does make a difference to me is that within this ability to function in a way that makes sense, like when I say makes sense, what is it that I can do in a day-to-day way that doesn't get me stuck in something, I suppose, that causes repetition? What is it that takes me out of a repetition of dysfunction, something that doesn't work, which is fundamentally civilization and culture is a repetition of everything that doesn't work. You may have some highlights you appreciate and you love, and you know, you have your rituals of whatever it is that you have that are okay, fine. But I'm saying that we are actually trapped in some form or other. It could actually be, some people have postulated the matrix idea, that we are in a simulation. We are actually living out something that is completely antithetical to whatever is real. And the more you do it, it's no longer an unreality. It is real, as you are so completely inundated by everything that we are, we feel we are, then it's real. But what I'm saying, this is a difficult concept to wrap your brain around, because it's the idea of watching the fish in the fishbowl. And I'm saying the reason we're in that peculiar state is because we have invented around us supporting structures that keep us in an interval of not being, which is an erroneous word called nothing. Just like a computer, like the zeros and the ones. What's in between, people? What is in between a 0 and a 1? What is that interval? What is like, it's like a breath of air or something? How does that work? You see, it makes no sense to actually be involved in something that fundamentally is not working. Like, it doesn't make sense. All right, so I'll get to the point. What the conclusion I came to today, after having reflected on nothing and what it is to be nothing, or in a state of nothing, whatever that is, which doesn't work really, the only way, the only alternative that I see to being, I suppose the word would be real. The word is something that connects me to a sense of function that I will call, for lack of a better word, wholesome in my day-to-day life. What I've always said, and it's the most fabulous, the most beautiful, dignified, exalted aspect of ourselves that we can extract. We can extract ourselves through our ability, through our desire, through our need to act on something within us that is outside of this interval, which, again, the word that I've used over and over for this is our ability to care. Something that creates within us a sense of outsideness, like there is an external aspect, even though it comes from within. We can externalize something that is of on such a high level. And the idea that we hear this in religious figures very often, the idea of empathy and to be feeling this quality that people seem to be able to conjure. It's kind of like the idea that if you were a soldier and your buddy is hurt and you take him out of the battlefield, and all those extraordinary acts of generosity and kindness, or a mother completely dedicated to their child would give their own life for the child, this feeling of stopping to be in the interval of nothing, whatever it takes, seems to be the only thing that gets us out of that, is this concept of what I've referred to as conscience. I keep harping on this, and it's something that everyone knows. It comes up all the time, but not within the context of this phenomenal aspect of our existence, the idea that we have bought into symbols and words. And you can go into this in terms of the demonic symbols. People can bring up evil all the time. All that hooey. It has nothing to do with that. It just has to do with the fact that we're stuck. We're stuck. We can't get out from this conundrum. And I'm saying the way we get out of it is through this internal feeling of actually being connected in some form to this mystery. And it usually is to other life forms, to other people. This is how it works. And I'm just saying this at the end of day reflections, is that it comes out of this. The reason we're in the shitter that we're in is because we've bought into the concept of nothing. So I would highly recommend to consider the possibility that this whole sort of dichotomy that we're always being subjected to, where people create antagonisms within us, like to say, well, is there a God? Isn't there? Is omnipotent being, nothing, something? The point is, we're stuck in something very clearly, and it's reinforced on so many different levels, and we end up with catastrophic situations. And we need to get ourselves out of this. We need to have a breather here, people. We got to have a breather. The suffering and the pain and all that kind of stuff has been going on too long because we're stuck in this interval. And we got to pull ourselves out of it. And that's the only way I see. Those are my thoughts at the end of the day. And, I suppose that if somebody looks at a painting or anything, let's say, whoever you like, whatever painting you like, I suggest that in your appreciation for something, when you're looking at something that is of significance, how does it address the level of dysfunction that an artist is able to displace? How is another artist with their vision, with their work, able to draw attention to this idea that I'm talking about, being stuck in an interval and drawing us out of it? Whether it's through shock, I suppose sometimes even what appears to be vulgar and horrible can be very instrumental in accomplishing this. But I'm saying that we need to be able to, at some point, sooner than later, because the reptiles, the people that are propagating the nothing part of us are really in command with all the inventions, with what I call the culture of death. And we need to extract ourselves one day at a time, one moment at a time, and invoke this part of us that connects us through what it is that we're able to do, which is to care. That's how it works. By the way, this is my third time of trying to articulate this, because it's been ruminating in my conscious mind as I'm working on these images, and they're getting harder to produce for some reason. I'm not sure. I have to do something with this that takes it now to the next level. Whatever the work that I've been doing, I have this sense in my own process that when it goes too easily, it's not always good. It's like when you do something, yes, there's a sweet feeling about producing something and you've worked on it, and then you just create the images. But it's not good to be in that kind of feeling all the time. You have to have a feeling of difficulty and trouble. I'm having difficulty with how to represent myself in the work that I'm doing right now. Which direction is it going to go? Talk to you later.